Dakota Territory, 1884. Winter had come early, the way trouble sometimes does. Quiet at first, then all at once. Snow clung to the grass in white patches, stubborn as old sins. Jonas Hale rode the boundary line with his collar turned up, Sarah's faded scarf pulled close to his throat. He moved like a man shaped by storms, steady in the saddle, eyes sharp for anything that didn't belong. That was when he saw it. A thin thread of smoke rising where there should have been nothing but frost and silence. He nudged the bay gelding forward. Through the aspens, a clearing opened like a wound cut into the land. Full-height log walls enclosed a rough cabin, unfinished, but no longer just a frame. A crude hearth of fieldstone burned inside, its smoke slipping upward through open rafters where the roof waited for shingles. Gaps still showed between logs where chinking had not been finished, and a corner of the roof was covered in canvas weighted with stones. It wasn't a home yet, but it was shelter enough to survive in. Inside that half-finished structure, a woman braced a beam alone, her breath leaving her in hard little bursts. Her coat hung loose over the swell of pregnancy. 6 months, maybe more. Her boots cracked, her hands raw from work in the cold seeping through the unsealed walls. A life carved down to grit. She lifted the timber again. Her knees shook. Jonas swung down before he had time to think. His boots crunched the frost. She spun at the sound, hammer raised like a warning. Her eyes were sharp as flint, sharp enough to tell him she'd been cornered before. "I'm not here to trouble you," he said. He kept his hands open, voice low. "Let me set this for you. I won't touch another thing." She didn't answer, but she didn't stop him either. He lifted the beam and set it in place with ease born of long seasons and harder winters. When he stepped back, he tipped his hat. "You're doing fine, ma'am." "No thanks." He didn't expect any. He mounted again and rode off, but when he glanced back, she was still standing there, one hand resting over her belly near the warmth of the crude hearth, holding the child that had driven her this far out into nowhere. Jonas pressed his heels to the gelding, but the smoke from her unfinished but fiercely defended shelter followed him long after he'd cleared the trees. Snow dusted the clearing by dawn, drifting sideways in thin, sharp flakes. Mara Keaton stepped out with her coat wrapped around her belly, joints aching the way they do when a woman is worn past her limits. She meant only to fetch water. Instead, her boot struck something hidden beneath the fresh white. A burlap sack, tied neat, heavy. Inside lay a coil of rope, a bundle of nails wrapped in cloth, a tin of salve, and a cured ham cold inside its waxed paper. Mara looked toward the aspens. "Show yourself," she called. Nothing answered. Just wind and white and the silence of someone who'd chosen not to be seen. She carried the sack inside anyway, cursing herself for the hunger that rose at the smell of that ham cooking. Inside, the drafty cabin hummed with cold wind slipping through the unsealed logs, smoke drifting upward through the open rafters. She ate in small, furious bites, each one reminding her how far a woman will go to survive when she has been cast out. Her mother's voice drifted up from memory. "You must understand, Mara. Your father cannot face the neighbors. Understand." As if the ruin of her name were a simple thing to swallow. The baby kicked hard, and Mara pressed a hand to her belly. "I know," she whispered. "We'll manage." The next dawn brought split firewood stacked neat as prayer beside her door. The morning after, shingles, clean-cut, bundled, waiting. She tried to ignore them. But the bootprints said otherwise. Broad steps even, belonging to a man who walked with purpose. When she rode into town for flour, silence followed her into the store. Whispers rose like smoke behind her back. Someone's helping her. Heard it's Jonas Hale. Heat climbed her neck, but she kept her chin high. Shame had chased her out of Boston. It would not chase her here. That night, she lit the fire with the gifted wood. Flames climbed fast, too fast, stirring something she didn't want to feel. The fire warmed only a small circle of space beneath the partial roof, smoke slipping upward through the open rafters in a thin ribbon. "Why can't you leave me be?" she whispered. But she already knew why. The ones who vanish teach fear. The ones who stay, quietly, steadily, teach something far more dangerous: hope. Morning broke thin and cold, but bright enough that Mara dared the woods for lumber. She hitched the mule to the small cart and worked until sweat dampened her hair despite the chill. By noon, clouds piled heavy in the west, dark as old bruises. The wind changed first. Sharper. Meaner. A warning any old settler would have heeded. Mara turned for home, but snow struck sideways, thickening fast, blurring the path beneath her boots. The mule balked, blind with fear. Landmarks she trusted vanished under the white. The world shrank to breath and cold and the ache of her child pressing low. A wave of dizziness washed over her. She braced herself against a tree, gasping. Then, hoofbeats, steady, direct, cutting through the storm. Jonas Hale rose out of the white like a figure carved from the land itself. Snow clung to his coat. His scarf whipped in the wind. "You're off the trail," he shouted. "How do you even know where my cabin is?" she cried back. "I pay attention." The wind slammed into them. Mara staggered. Jonas swung down, tied the mule's rope to his saddle horn, and steadied her with one hand. "I'm getting you home," he said. "You can yell at me later." Pride tried to rise, but another burst of pain stole her breath. Jonas lifted her onto his horse as if she weighed no more than a sack of feed. He climbed up behind her, one arm braced around her as he turned the horse toward the storm's teeth. "Eyes on the trees," he murmured. "Think of the fire waiting." The white swallowed everything else, but she felt the steadiness of him at her back, warm, real, something she hadn't dared lean on since fleeing Boston. It frightened her more than the storm. The storm broke at last. Not gently, storms out here seldom did, but with the grudging pullback of a beast deciding it had done enough harm. Snow lay in deep, wind-carved sweeps around the Hale ranch. Jonas rode the boundary line slow, checking for downed fence and any cattle that might have drifted. But his eyes kept drifting north, toward the thin thread of smoke rising from the clearing where a woman too stubborn to quit fought winter one log at a time. He told himself he was only making sure she'd weathered the storm. He told himself many things. Later that week, he rode into town for supplies. The general store was warm with stove heat, windows fogged, shelves smelling of coffee and burlap. Mrs. Weaver greeted him with a brightness that felt just a shade too practiced. "Morning, Jonas." "Morning." Voices near the stove dipped as he walked past. "Heard he rode out in the blizzard. Fool thing to do." Unless he had reason. Jonas kept his jaw hard as iron. He gathered coffee, lantern oil, nails, set them on the counter, paid. But when he stepped out onto the boardwalk, another voice caught him. "Jonas." Eli stood by the hitching post, broader than Jonas, cleaner shaven, his coat free of the wear Jonas's carried. Respectable. That was the word folks used for him. "We need a word," Eli said. They stepped to the trough where the ice had been broken that morning. "You've been seen riding to her place," Eli said quietly. "People are talking. Let them." That's easy to say when I'm the one keeping the contract steady. The Claytons watch every move we make. You know how they love to turn rumor into leverage. Jonas's mouth tightened. Helping a woman alone isn't a misstep. "It is," Eli said, "if Reeves decides to make it one." The name landed heavy. Jonas felt the knot in his chest coil tighter. He'd seen Reeves circling folks like a wolf watching for weakness. Eli lowered his voice. "I'm saying this because you're my brother. You're walking yourself into trouble." Jonas met his eyes, steady as stone. "Some trouble's worth it." Eli exhaled, long and disappointed. "Then don't expect me to clean up the mess." Jonas mounted and rode out of town with the same eyes watching him, measuring, whispering. But none of that mattered as much as the thin smoke rising from the north. Stubborn, steady, refusing to die out. Reeves arrived the way men do who believe the world clears a path for them. Buggy polished, gloves spotless, posture stiff enough to match the cold. Mara heard him before she saw him. The brittle crunch of wheels on crusted snow. The clipped rhythm of a horse that had never known hunger. She stepped outside, one hand braced on the doorframe. "Miss Keaton," Reeves said, giving a small, formal nod that barely passed for courtesy. "Mr. Reeves." He glanced at her half-built cabin circling slow, the way a man circles a claim he already thinks he owns. "Reviewing filings," he said. "Yours raised. Concerns." Her stomach tightened. "What concerns?" Reeves folded his hands behind his back, as if about to deliver scripture. Under the Homestead Act, a claimant must prove improvement and capability. His gaze dropped to her belly. "Your condition complicates that." Mara straightened. "I've worked this land myself." "So it appears," Reeves said lightly. "And yet there are whispers. Unfavorable whispers about a widower visiting your land." Mara's jaw clenched. "Jonas Hale has done nothing improper." Reeves smiled, small and sharp. "Perhaps. But appearances, Miss Keaton, appearances hold weight." He paused by the doorway, eyeing the blankets near the fire and the lone footprint trails frozen into the packed dirt floor. "Your marital record is still intact in Massachusetts," he added. "Legally, that means your husband may hold claim to whatever you prove up here." Mara's voice came thin. "My husband left me." "The law does not track a man's moral deficiencies," Reeves replied. "Only his signatures." The words hit like a blow. "What do you want?" she asked. "Stability," he said. "This acreage could do more good in capable hands. A rancher to the south is interested. Wealthy, respected, less precarious. You mean to take it?" "If improvements remain insufficient by thaw," Reeves said, "I will have no choice." He gave a thin, insincere nod before turning and stepping back into his buggy. The wheels cut deep scars into the clearing as he rode away. Mara stood in the doorway long after he vanished, both hands pressed to her belly. "He won't take this," she whispered, but doubt whispered back. Wind hissed around the unfinished cabin, slipping through the smallest gaps in the logs. Mara fed the fire early, coaxing flame into strength. Smoke drifted upward through the open rafters, escaping where shingles had yet to be laid. Shadows climbed the walls like restless spirits. She was rubbing salve into her cracked palms when the knock came. 3 slow, deliberate taps. No one knocked out here. She opened the door an inch. Snow swept in. Jonas Hale stood on the porch, coat dusted white, scarf high around his throat. His eyes searched hers with a kind of quiet urgency. "I saw Reeves's buggy tracks," he said. "Wanted to be sure you were all right." Mara stepped back just enough for him to enter. He stamped snow from his boots and shut the door gently, as though afraid sound alone might break something fragile. "What did he say?" Jonas asked. She stared at the fire. "That my claim might not be valid. That I'm not capable. That I should find protection." Jonas's jaw flexed. He moved near the hearth, warming his hands. "Reeves wants leverage. Someone with money wants this land. He'll twist any rule he needs to." Mara lowered herself to the floor across from him. In the firelight she looked young, tired, worn thin by winter and memory. "I didn't ask you for wood," she said. "Or food. Or anything. I know. I don't want people talking." "What people say," Jonas murmured, "has nothing to do with what's right." She looked up sharply. "I don't understand you." Jonas exhaled, long and heavy. He stared into the fire. "My wife died in childbirth, 5 winters back. Storm worse than this one." I held her hand until it went cold. Mara's breath hitched. "Jonas, I've carried that weight ever since," he said quietly. "Seeing you here, doing everything alone, I can't." He broke off, jaw tightening. "I won't lose another woman to a storm if I can stand between her and the cold." Silence filled the cabin, warm and painful. Mara swallowed hard. "My family cast me out. My husband lied about me, and they believed him. They told me to leave before the neighbors learned." Jonas met her eyes. "You deserve better." A gust slammed the shutters, making them both flinch. "Storm's coming," Jonas said softly. Something in Mara shifted fear, yes, but also a quiet kind of release. "Stay," she whispered. Jonas didn't smile, but he nodded once, and the fire's glow seemed to steady. The storm came down fast, the way winter does when it remembers its anger. Snow thickened until the world turned to chalk. Wind clawed at the unsealed cabin seams, whistling through gaps in the walls. Drifts climbed the partial exterior, piling against the unshingled sections like they meant to bury the place whole. Jonas stayed. Mara didn't ask, and he didn't wait for permission. He checked the mule, tied the lean-to tight, and brought in wood until the pile near the hearth reached his knees. By nightfall, the windows had vanished behind shutters rattling like loose teeth. Inside, the lantern flame trembled. Mara sat wrapped in blankets, hands shaking as she worked the salve into her palms. Jonas sealed a crack in the frame with a strip of cloth, whose shoulders bent under the weight of memory. "You should sleep," she said. "So should you. The baby keeps pressing low." He looked at her then, really looked, fear flickering across his face before he pushed it down. "Storms like this can stir things early." "It's too soon," she whispered. "It happens." The hours stretched thin. They ate beans and melted snow, took turns keeping the fire from losing heart. Once, a heavy slide of snow tore down the roof. The cabin shuddered. Mara gasped. "It held," Jonas said quickly. "It'll keep holding." Another tightening wrung a sound from her she couldn't hide. She pressed both hands to her belly. "How long has that been?" he asked. "Since dusk." "It's not pain, just pressure." Jonas sat beside her, steady as bedrock. "We'll keep watch." The wind howled, a sound old as the prairie itself. Jonas reached into his coat and pulled out the small wooden cradle he'd been carving by lamplight. Unfinished, edges rough, hope still taking shape. "I meant to bring it when it was done," he said. Mara traced its curve with her thumb. "It's beautiful." "Not yet," he murmured. "But it will be." Thunder of wind, crackling fire. Two people sitting closer than silence allowed. For the first time since the day she fled Boston, Mara leaned, just a breath, just a moment, against someone who would not vanish. By the fourth morning, the storm weakened to a whisper. Snow piled high as a man's chest. The fire burned low, kept alive by Jonas's stubborn hands. Mara slept at last, curled around the cradle. Jonas sat near the door, worn thin by sleeplessness. Every time Mara stirred, he rose. Every time the wind pressed the shutters, he checked the beam overhead. Then he heard it. Hoofbeats. Slow, deliberate, wrong for this kind of morning. Jonas stiffened, hand brushing the revolver on its peg. 3 booming knocks shook the door. "Stay back," he murmured to Mara. She pushed herself upright, blinking. Another knock, impatient, entitled. Mara opened the door a crack. Silas Reeves stood on the porch, frost on his coat, hands clean, eyes sharp with the satisfaction of a wolf finding weakness. Behind him waited 2 mounted men, rifles on their saddles. "Miss Keaton," Reeves said, "I trust the storm didn't trouble you too much." Mara's grip tightened. "What do you want?" Reeves's gaze slid past her toward the blankets by the fire, the 2 plates. Jonas's coat hung to dry. "I see you are not alone. That's none of your concern." Oh, but it is. Reeves stepped forward a fraction, just enough to make the point. Propriety matters, especially when a claim is already in question. Jonas stepped into view. The doorway felt smaller for it. Mind your tone, Jonas said. Reeves didn't blink. Mr. Hale, your presence complicates Miss Keaton's eligibility. A married woman deserted by her husband, now taking in a widower during a storm. Well, it paints an unfortunate picture. This is her land, Jonas said. For now, Reeves replied, and I will be filing preliminary notice of forfeiture. She has until thaw to prove she can meet the requirements. Mara shook, anger and fear gnawing at the edges of her voice. You can't just. I can, Reeves said, and I will. He gave a shallow nod and left deep ruts across the clearing, ugly scars in the white. Mara shut the door with shaking hands. Jonas lowered the bar into place. He means to take everything, she whispered. Jonas placed a steady hand on her shoulder. Then he'll have to go through both of us. For a breath, she let herself lean into that promise. Reeves's shadow lingered long after he left. His threats clung to the cabin's air like smoke no wind could clear. Mara moved about the room with strain in her steps, her breath catching each time she thought of losing the land she'd bled for. Another contraction of pressure doubled her for a moment. She brushed it off, but Jonas saw. Mara? It's nothing. But the word broke in the middle. He guided her to sit. She resisted until another tightening took her breath. You need rest, Jonas said. And you need to stop treating me like I'm breakable. He shook his head. You're the strongest woman I've met. Doesn't mean the storm or the child cares. She looked toward the window where snow drifted soft but steady. It's too soon. Jonas stoked the fire high, sending sparks reaching. We'll face what comes. Mara pressed a hand to her ribs as the baby rolled low, heavy, and insistent. I don't have time for this. I need more wood, need to check the roof line. Jonas caught her arm gently. You step outside in this cold, and you won't last 10 minutes. I won't let you die trying to prove something you've already proved. Another contraction hit. She gasped, clutching his shoulder before she could stop herself. Jonas dropped the piece of wood he'd been whittling. How long like that? An hour. Maybe more. He knelt in front of her. Then we take this breath by breath. She exhaled shakily. Jonas? Why do you stay? He looked down at his hands, scarred by rope, shaped by loss. Because walking away once cost me everything. I won't make that mistake again. The truth softened something inside her. Fear loosened. Trust took its place. Outside, the storm gathered strength. Inside, the first threads of labor tightened. The line between survival and surrender was starting to thin. The contractions grew sharper as daylight thinned. What had begun as a pull of pressure now carved itself into Mara's breath with a rhythm she could no longer deny. She tried to stand, to keep her hands busy, but each movement brought a tightening that bent her in half. Jonas stayed close, not hovering. He knew better than that, but near enough to catch her if she fell. He moved through the cabin like a man preparing for war, tending the fire, chopping what wood he could, checking the shutters against the rising wind. Mara? He asked as another wave hit. It's too soon, she whispered. He didn't argue. He didn't lie. Plenty of children come early. You don't know that. He looked at the cradle he'd carved, unfinished edges catching the firelight. Feels like a girl, he said softly. She managed the faintest laugh before pain stole the sound. She gripped the table until her knuckles blanched. Jonas eased her down onto the pallet, his voice low. We take this slow. Hours blurred. Wind roared. Shutters shuddered like they might lift from their hinges. Jonas checked the roof beam again, palm pressed to the timber as if listening for strain. Snow slid down the shingles with a sound like distant thunder. Mara gasped. It held, he said quickly. It'll keep holding. Her breath trembled. If the fire goes out, it won't, he said. I won't let it. Another contraction dragged through her. She cried out, her hand finding Jonas's shoulder. He stayed steady, bracing her, grounding her. Don't leave me, she gasped, half delirious with fear. Jonas froze. Then he cupped her cheek with a tenderness shaped by grief and winter, and 5 years of carrying what no man should carry alone. I'm not going anywhere, he whispered. Not now. Not ever.